Um, Excellent. So keep them coming in. I know a few people are still joining. The three questions that just to quickly recap, we want the panelists to know, and we'll try and share later. Is the sort of where in your house are you calling in from? What area of town if you're Westport, or which town if you're a neighbor? And if you're a student, what grade? And if you're a professional or sort of not student anymore, what's your interest on this? And then the last question was, do you compost, and do you have a food saving tip for the rest of us? And just before I sort of get us started, it's about 5:03, 5:04. I've got another couple Parmesan rinds in soup stock. And yes, home composting. We have an eat now section of the fridge. Make crazy rice or crazy pasta by taking leftover veggies, fruits, and nuts. Thank you, Diana. Excellent. Okay, well, everybody, good evening and welcome. And welcome to join our special presentation here on Earth Day. Keep the comments coming in. We'll grab them, and also questions. We got you used to, hopefully, the webinar chat piece for the remainder of the hour. Welcome to a special presentation on Earth Day. My name is Peter Boyd. I'm chair of the Sustainable Westport Advisory Team, and I'll be your moderator for the hour we've got together. This is both a continuation and something new. It's a continuation of our ongoing environmental learning series, which is a 6-year-long collaboration with Sustainable Westport and Earthplace, the Nature Learning and Discovery Center. And it's really excited to have such a long partnership in place on that. And we have Tony McDowell, the executive director, here joining us on the panel just after our main speaker. And we've got Pippa Belader also joining us there locally, representing both Sustainable Westport, but more importantly, heading up the Zero Food Waste Group. And so that's the old partnership, that's the continuation. But we're excited to be welcoming the Westport Public Library into this partnership this year. Both the library and us are equally excited to really get their their marketing might, the technology, the staff, and when appropriate, the venue, to really be a support of really getting an aware and engaged community, which is an essential part of our journey to sustainability. Today's Earth Day, though, is unique. So that's the continuation. It's unique in at least a couple of ways. It's unique because it's 50. It's a very special year for Earth Day. You've probably seen some stuff as sustainability followers around the internet, and you'll have some favorite things, not least to follow on Sustainable Westport's Instagram posts and website. We've been trying to keep track of some of the best stuff, but you'll have seen other things around the internet on this 50 years. And also just, sort of got to be recognized this incredibly special and sort of concerning times for us all. In terms of dealing with us all and being virtual in this time of pandemic. I think many of us are sort of going through some sort of adjustment processes in life. People have talked about the stages of grief that many are feeling, not also the most tragic ones or the tangible ones about lost loved ones, but also the grieving of the mental, spiritual sort of piece of sort of losing lifestyles and not really the uncertainty of what's coming and when the next normal is sort of what it becomes. So I think what is not unique though to this Earth Day or to Westport actually is our pursuit of a world in balance. The idea of humanity being at balance with nature. The pursuit in that there's a technical term for it in terms of net zero, and Westport has actually joined that target. We did this back in 2015, supported by what we would call the Green Task Force, now the Sustainable Westport Advisory Team. We supported the First Selectmen and the RTM in their goal to become net zero by 2050, which is in line with the Paris Agreement, and in fact all nations coming together and saying we as a world basically need to find that moment of balance when sort of human emissions have dropped not to absolute zero, but to the level we are in balance, and nature's ability to cope with those emissions have reached a stage of equilibrium. So that important piece of being net zero by 2050, it's important to the world. It's important, to governments, and the Paris Agreement said in 2015, and it's important here in our town. And what's great about it is it can be applied at every level, right indeed down to the family level. We can be net zero by 2050 as a family unit, as a community, and even as an individual. So we've done quite a few initiatives in Sustainable Westport in order to do that, again, in partnership with people like Earthplace, Wakeman Town Farm, the library, and others. But the one we want to focus on today, and that covers energy and transport and more. The one we want to focus on today is our waste streams. And for starters, up to 40% of our municipal waste is compostable material. So primarily food waste. So we're really excited to be talking about that today, and I'll be handing over in just a second to our guest speaker. We would have also been announcing a proclamation from the First Selectman and a guide, and in fact, a launch very soon of a recycling center piece. That's obviously delayed a bit, but we'll cover the local developments afterwards with Pippa after our main speaker. So we're really very excited to introduce our featured speaker today. So it's in that context of our journey to net zero and creating a sustainable community. We want and be proud of our sons and daughters and grandchildren to be in that community for many years to come. That we're focusing on this today. And so our featured speaker is Lori Fontanes. She's agreed to join us online, so an easy commute for her. Dialing in from home to like everyone else here. She's a writer, photographer, and a backyard farmer. She grows more than 20 kinds of fruit and vegetables, covers crops, heritage waterfowl on land previously used for lawn. Her work has appeared in publications such as Backyard Poultry, Countryside, Acres, Grit, and EcoWatch. She lives in Rye, New York, so it wouldn't have been too hard for her to come in person. But she's joining us today here. And so, Lori, we're so grateful to welcome you here to Westport on the online version of Westport on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day.
Yeah,
Lori,
saved all that gas. Thank you so much for having me, guys. So I'm just going to do a few thank yous, and then we're going to roll right into the PowerPoint because I have a lot to cover. So obviously, thank you, Westport Library. Even though we can't be there in person today, it's an amazing setup. Thank you, Earthplace, Tony and the team there. And thank you, Sustainable Westport, Pippa especially, who's been so lovely, and Peter, who I'm just meeting for the first time digitally. So let us do this. Let's start with this. Here is this. Okay, everybody see that? Let's see. All right. So one thing I want to say about this presentation is that when we decided to do this a couple months ago, the world was a very different place. And even then, this talk, which I've been giving around the region, was already a kind of a different take on the way we've often been speaking about sustainable development, sustainable concepts. And so now you have something I think you're gonna realize tonight after you go through this with me, that we have been given an opportunity to do something, in fact, quite different than what we've been doing. So feeding people in a time of climate change and COVID-19, I want to start by saying Happy Earth Day. It's the 50th anniversary. I think we will all agree that it probably could be happier. The situation is incredibly difficult for so many people who have lost family, for our frontline workers, for the economic hardship that people are enduring right now. So we have to pause and really understand that is the worst of times, but at the same time, it could be the best of times. That we could look at this as an opportunity when we have this moment to reflect, to analyze, and to plan. As Greta Thunberg apparently said today as well, that this is a moment to do things differently. And so let's pause. Let's truly pause, like we were doing in New York, and stop and think about how we can reshape this, why we have this opportunity. So, happy Earth Day, I think. Yeah, I'm going to say, let's stay on a positive note here. I think one of the really positive aspects too of the idea of the pandemic and its impact on the environment is that it allows us this really unbelievably unique opportunity to see what the world is like when we do stop everything. I lived in LA for 25 years, and the images that I'm seeing from LA are unbelievable. So we can see what human impacts have been, and at the same time imagine how much better things could be. So on that, we could keep that in mind as we go along. All right, so here's the thing about the food system. I've got good news and I've got bad news for you. The bad news, I think, is pretty obvious. The food system is terrible, right? And climate change is going to change everything. Climate change is already here. It's not 10 years down the road. It's actually happening on our farms right now, in our food system right now, which will be further impacted by the pandemic. But the good news is that everything's going to change. So again, I think that this is a moment for us to say, okay, yes, it's bad, but it could be quite good. The main reason that our system is bad is because it doesn't really feed us, right? I mean, shouldn't that be the bare minimum of a food system, that it feeds people? I mean, yes, people eat things, but are they really food? So much of what we're pushing out of this industrial food system is barely food by any definition. And in the days when one could just wander through Stop and Shop and go up and down the aisles, you could, if you did this, and I used to do this just sort of for fun, I would go down and I would say, food, not food, not food, not food, food, not food, not, I mean, try it the next time you're allowed back into a grocery store. It's unbelievable, but in about the 50 years that since Earth Day was started, the food system has gotten more and more geared towards the lowest common denominator. The thing that's a quick pleasure, the thing that's convenient, the thing that is economical to produce, where the profit margins are huge, but that's not necessarily actually food. So that situation is not sustainable for a lot of reasons, but the main reasons that it's not sustainable are, first and foremost, humans first, the health effects are terrible. At the same time as we're producing this non-food, we're producing it at a rate of a very high waste, level of waste, and an enormous amount of food insecurity at the same time. So we're producing a lot of food that's low quality. We're wasteful in the manner in which we produce it. And at the same time, so many people are hungry. They're either not actually getting food, or the food that they're getting is not really sustaining them. But on Earth Day, we should also think about the third important aspect of this bad food system, which is the climate impacts. This was a climate presentation initially for a lot of reasons, because food is a huge important part of what we do that impacts the climate. It's not the largest or the only one, but it is a significant one. And it's very important because it's something that you can actually do. You're not going to be probably designing a new airplane that doesn't run on the same fuel that we use, but you can decide what you're going to eat tomorrow. You can decide 3 times a day, probably, what you put on your plate. And that is huge. That's a huge impact. And it's something that everybody can do. So to the health effects. This is a difficult thing for people to talk about. It's become more and more difficult. I did a thesis last year, which looked at the industrial food system's impacts on the human body. And so I did a lot of research, and I pulled this slide from the CDC. It shows obesity trends. Now, if you're under 40, let's say, or 30 even, you didn't live in a world where people weren't heavy. I mean, this is a dramatic change, but it's a change that not everyone actually has lived through. I'm old enough to remember when the slide says 1990, but I'm old enough to remember what people, their weight was in 1975. And it was quite different. So this dramatic change in poor health, and in particular, the marker of poor health, which is obesity, has happened in a relatively short time. And it is consistent with the rise in industrial foods, the things we just talked about, the aisles stocked with things that actually don't feed you. And so the most important thing to understand here, though, is that it's relatively recent development, but the impacts were really profound in a relatively short amount of time. And then a really sad thing happened. COVID-19 happened. And as recently as late February, I was already reading with my colleagues on the notion of what would happen if COVID-19 came to the United States. And one of my colleagues had pointed out that obesity levels in the United States were higher than in China. And that even though China had some weaknesses in terms of their smoking rates, and that could have been a factor with all of the men who got sick, they were concerned already that the high levels of obesity and overweight in the United States might be a devastating situation. And in fact, that has turned out to be the case. Just this week, there were a couple of stories in the major press, in particular the New York Times, that discussed obesity as a risk factor. This doctor who is in critical care she is on the front lines at Mount Sinai Hospital. And the cases are appalling, and the cases are with young people too. So it's not that they have diabetes, or which could be a part of the being obese. It's not necessarily that they have high blood pressure or heart disease, but they did not have those things. They were too young, and they hadn't actually developed those symptoms, but they were obese. And so that they realized that it's in fact obesity that is the underlying factor in a lot of these situations. And it breaks my heart, because when we know that people are obese essentially because of the food environment that we're living in, that we are supporting with our tax dollars, that we have not changed in the last 25 to 30 years in particular, it's just heartbreaking, because this did not need to happen. So industrial food is bad for people. I think I've made that point. But why is it bad? What are some of the things that are bad about it? Well, one of the things are these giant portions, because it's so cheap to produce, relatively speaking. So people have become just accustomed to the idea that they need to have these giant plates of things for a low price, and that's a good deal. But it's not a good deal. It may seem cheap on the front end. It's very expensive on the back end. The ingredients are poor. The processing strips more of the nutrition from maybe some of the totally wholesome ingredients that were there. And because it's such a convenience culture, we are just used to the idea of having things constantly, ready for us. We are constantly grazing. We're constantly swimming in a sea of poor nutrition elements of all kinds. So it's bad for people. It's also bad for the planet. This is obvious for other reasons, but let's go through some of the aspects of this. The reason industrial food, as opposed to, say, carrots from your farmer's market, are a product that creates a great deal of emissions, and not in the ways that you might be used to thinking. You often hear talking about cows, for example, but you have to think about industrial food creates emissions at every step of the way, in the production process, in transportation, in consumption, and in waste. So it doesn't matter that you have, let's say, something that you think is very nutritious, but if you have to put it in a container, if it has to be heavily processed and then it has to be trucked in each of those ingredients, then that's each step of the way it is creating emissions which have an impact on the environment. The other thing to think about often in this is scale, right? So the way our system works is that it has to be on demand, and it has to be big, and it has to be big so it can be cheap. And so scale itself is a part of the problem. In order to fulfill the market needs, you have to create something that can be scaled up. You hear that in technology all the time. But in the real world, right, in the in-person world, scale is huge. It has impacts that go beyond something that's just digital. The other big piece of this, and there are a lot of stories out about this now that we're in the world of pandemic, people are starting to notice the way things have been consolidated. For example, the meat packing stories that you've been hearing this week, all of the poor workers at those plants that are actually working on putting those things together for us to be put in those aisles, right? So, but there's only really a handful of companies that are doing all this. And so you have these weaknesses that become evident in a time of crisis like this. This consolidation of power discourages alternate systems because it's more expensive and more difficult. And there's an inertia about the idea of doing things differently to begin with. And Big Food has worked hand in hand. They're lobbyists, and just the sheer amount of money that they have and power that they have to so that these other alternate systems can't come up. And it's a little bit like the energy system conundrum. The final thing is that, of course, the fossil fuel companies are having a very bad week, but up to this point they have not, and they are hugely integrated into the way we create our food. So that's from the pesticides that are used in conventional food. That's in the fuel that's used for the equipment, that's in transporting it. I mean, you get the picture, right? It's every phase. And don't forget, just because it's organic doesn't mean that it's not industrial. So the wonderful Cornucopia Institute put out this on Twitter a couple days ago, and you can see with Purdue, Tyson, Hormel, these are major companies, right? So again, it's not the product per se necessarily, or the ingredient even, it's the whole system of how we actually promote and the way we eat. We're back with Greta here. So she calls it, amazingly, fairy tales of eternal growth, which is what it's capitalism, right? And she's right. I mean, she's a young person. She totally gets it right away. How can things always just get bigger? How can the market has to grow in order for things to be profitable? But in the real world, and this planet that's under so much stress, with people on it under so much stress, things have a limit, right? That's what sustainability really means. So it's important to remember this is a market problem at the end of the day. This isn't, cows versus, something else. This isn't almonds versus dairy. This is a much bigger problem. This is a problem of economics. This is a problem of the global marketplace that we have created that requires on demand, it requires overproduction. And in the end, what it has created is a race to the bottom. COVID-19 has become a stress test on this system. And again, if you're reading any of the press on this in the last couple of weeks, you can see they're the poor growers, right? So the farmers in New York and Connecticut, but even any scale farm right now has been impacted by this, right? So they don't have a market. The markets have shut down, the restaurants have shut down, the ships, the airplanes, all of these places, Disneyland, shut down, right? So they're on a schedule, cows, right? They need to be milked. So they're pouring milk into the drains, right? So that has shown people, oh, that's how it works, right? Cows need to be milked, right? We can't just stop. So it shines a light on that particular part that stresses that part of the system. And the processing end of it, as we talked about, those poor workers in the packing plants, just like at Amazon, right? All of those places, people working for very low wages, doing the jobs that are very, very difficult to do, but that are part of our industrial food system, they get sick. And then they create a hotspot. And so then that shines a light on that weakness and that stress and that unfairness in the system that we have created. Then, of course, the final piece is the retail sales end of it, right? The lockdown created a situation where businesses may not survive this, right? Which is a tragedy on many levels. Also shines a light on, okay, that's where the food goes. We're so used to things just being there. We're so used to being able to walk through any part of our day in our office place, in our schools, at the airport, and just have these cheap, convenient foods available, that when we can't do that, it actually forces us to look at the entire process that created that situation. All right, so I hope I've convinced you by this point that this is a system that is, ironically, a system both of waste and want. The waste part, I think, is pretty clear. The want part is, I think, also clear. Of yes, people have always been hungry, but the irony of wasting 40% of what we grow at a time when anybody's hungry, it just seems to me incredibly immoral at the very least. And it's also an assessment of just how poor the system is that we have created. It's not working. right? It's not working if people are that hungry. I want to look a little bit deeper at the climate portion of this, right? So you may not agree with me, right? You may not agree that that junk food is bad. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not saying don't eat sweets. I love chocolate, right? I mean, I have stuff, right? But when I was a kid, we had one kind of Oreo, right? And I loved Oreos. I still love Oreos. We didn't have like, what is this? Like 40 different kinds of Oreos. That's just one shelf, right? And the products that are inside of that are themselves destructive to the environment. So, the palm stuff, and any of these industrial ingredients themselves leave a trail of environmental degradation. So it's really something to think about. And okay, here's the trick question. I get this question a lot. So which is better? Almond milk or whole milk? So full disclosure, I drink milk. I live in New York State. We have a very wonderful community of dairy farmers upstate. I've come to know some of them. They're lovely people. It's family farms. These are not the giant CAFOs that you see in California, because I've been there many times and seen those operations, or what you might find in the Midwest. It's quite different. So the almond milk has its own history, but I can tell you that I probably actually may even know the person whose cows put the milk in this bottle, right? This is in a glass returnable bottle, right? Not plastic. It's a whole milk product. It's a regional farmer. It didn't go very far to get to my table, and then I return it every week, and the price is reasonable. And what's in almond milk, right? So this is actually from the USDA website: filtered water, organic almonds, blah, 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 right? You can see all of this. And so each one of these ingredients has its own trail of environmental impact, right? So it had to be produced, especially of the chemicals that are in it. Those are not anywhere near the factory that is actually producing the final products, that they have to be trucked or transported some way. Many of these actually come from China. Many of the vitamin ingredients that we have come to rely on in our system come there. So that's many, many, many miles that go into this container. But more importantly, for my perspective, it's the almonds themselves, right? These massive farms in California. The Guardian has called it like sending bees to war, right? For us to have this drink. Almonds are a thirsty crop, and there is a good way and a bad way to water an almond tree, but California is not a place that has a lot of water naturally. So you have to ask yourself, we are building this entire industry around this convenience product. And then one of my other favorites, that's satire, Soylent, right? Soylent. What is Soylent? It's completely industrial. It was empty. This was at like some college I went to. I couldn't tell whether it's because they just didn't bother to restock it or it was so popular. I'm actually not sure. So which is better for you? This Soylent product or this nice meal that I made myself one afternoon with eggs and chives from my backyard and little arugula, right? I ate all of it, by the way, no waste whatsoever. And I don't know, you guys might be too young to know this, but you should check this out. The Soylent was actually a movie, and it was a dystopian film. And I'm not going to give away the punchline of what Soylent actually is. So I wonder if this is like a giant joke anyway, but please check out this movie. It is about what happens when we don't take care of our planet. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of like halo effects with foods that are heavily industrial is this product called the Impossible Burger and all of its different brethren. So the funny thing about, not so funny for the investors, they think. But so there was a huge interest in plant-based stuff for a while, because plant-based is one of those terms that everyone's like, oh, it's plant-based, that must be great, right? Like, without really unpacking what that means. It's a marketing term, right? So there was a huge amount of sales when it first happens at the end of last year. I think there was a huge uptick. And then more recently, they realized that they had to like cut the price to actually sell them at some of these fast food joints, because people weren't actually coming back for seconds. So I don't know. Again, it's a very industrial product. If you want a burger, eat a burger. If you don't want to eat a burger, you know, you can eat something else, right? It slots into this system. It's just like the way that the recyclers found out that if they put the little recycling symbol on something, that they could make you like think it was okay then to have something in a bottle. Without the recycling symbol and this recycling process, maybe you wouldn't actually do this, right? And so the same thing happens when you put a halo effect on some of these other industrial natural products, whatever they are. So cows are plant-based, guys. As it turns out, they eat plants and they convert them into food that we can eat. So beware terms like plant-based. They're marketing, just like the term heart healthy. If it's on a container, then that means it was packaged, and it could be highly processed or not so processed, but still it is marketed. It's cui bono, right? Who's profiting from you thinking this is healthy or good for you or good for the planet or whatever the slogan of the week is? If it has this packaging, then you really should maybe examine the marketing that went into this and say, I don't know, maybe this just perpetuates the system. Maybe there's a better way. Okay, so now what can we do about this, right? I've just outlined all of the, prodigiously large things that are wrong with the system. And I don't get me wrong, I know that this is like a huge task, an enormous task. It's taken a long time for us to get to this place since World War II. And it's a mess, but there are things we can do. First thing you need to know, don't feel guilty. Okay, please don't feel guilty. I never want people to walk away from this and think that, I'm shaming anybody. I don't want to feel shamed about, you're never going to get it perfect. It's a difficult thing to change stuff, even just in your own life, let alone a whole system. But it doesn't start at home either. It actually is a systemic wide problem, and understand that, right? So a lot of people don't have choice. You may not be able to afford it. You may not have the time. It may be you don't have the skill set yet to do things differently. So just please don't feel guilty. Okay. That won't help you, and you probably won't want to make the change that needs to happen anyway. Okay, what you can do, you need to vote like your life depends on it, because it does. In this case, and Ms. Thunberg says this now too, a lot of people have figured this out, that many of the changes that we need to happen have to come from people in charge. Right? So from the federal government down, the USDA is an enormous branch of the federal government, and it matters who's in the White House. It matters who is in the Congress. It matters on a state level. There are statewide changes that you can make happen. And so voting really matters. Public activism really matters in this case. Make your voice heard for these changes that you want. And so it's not just what you're doing with your purse that is important, but it's actually not enough. The most important thing you can do is vote for the system that you want to see happen. And then it comes down to three things, right? It's a very simple recipe. Feed yourself well. If you have extra, you can afford to. Feed others. Help create a system that feeds other people better than they're being fed right now. And then if you have anything left after that, and hopefully we'll be learning some more tips on this too about how not to waste so much food. But if you have extras, yes, feed the earth, right? Figure out how to compost, or if you're in a situation where you can have a curbside pickup like we have in Rye now, oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's like the easiest thing ever. Then a compost system is a great way, but it should be the last resort, right? The first resort is doing it better so that we don't have the waste. So what does that look like? we should all cook more, right? And by cooking, I don't mean like, you know, one of these crazy chefs on the cable TV shows. I mean anything. Making a sandwich is cooking under this definition. Even taking home leftovers and having a second meal, right? That's eating at home. That contributes. Try to eat less processed food. I want you to take a look at this picture. This is from, and I won't tell you which school it's from, but it's from a school. It's one trash can at one lunch period in a middle school. And it's terrifying. The bags of fruits, the packaging that went into this. I mean, we have to be able to do better, right, people? This is terrible. And so wasting less in our institutions is huge too. So it's not just your house, it's where your children or where you go to school, speaking up to try to find a way. There are schools that are doing this well. In Vermont, I have Middlebury College does an amazing job with their system. There are models out there. Workplace, and then other institutions. So helping people who can't help themselves is one other model that you can go into an institution and you can make suggestions as well for this change, because it has to happen at every level. So home cooking, though, is my own personal favorite. This is something that I made. It's I'm a good cook, I will say, but it took me like 10 years to learn how to do it really, really well. But you don't, believe me, don't need to take quite that amount of time. But if there's one thing you can do, really, it's learn how to cook if you don't already. And if you do know how, teach someone else, teach your children, teach a friend, right? And cook more. Every time you cook, instead of investing in this system that is so unhealthy, you are helping the planet. So you can feel good about that too. And you can eat it. It tastes really good. The other thing I want to touch on here again is animals are not the enemy in this equation. In a world where we need to heal the planet, animals that are well raised are going to be a huge part of this. And there's a whole other webinar I could do about regenerative agriculture and organic, not large scale organic, but the kind of organic that NOFA, Connecticut, NOFA, New York, those organizations are supporting. There is a role in this new healed planet for the kind of animals that we have evolved with. So, but in essence, the system looks like this. It's regional, it's regenerative, it heals the soil after many, many decades of degradation from the chemicals that we have been putting into them and the overdevelopment of the soil. And it's a resilient system because for two main reasons, it really needs to be resilient. Now, it's not just like an option, right? It's the climate itself, the changes, the crisis that is here already will require us to be resilient in a whole new way. And then the pandemic, of course, has shown us what the need is for resilience and the need for a regional, not global, food system that we can call upon and that we already have in place for times of emergency like the pandemic and crisis that we are actually in already. So those are the 3 R's. And if we go to, you know, the wise people who have been working on this food thing for longer than I have, their takeaway message always is, it's not get rid of everything or get rid of all of that, but to do it in moderation, right? So Mark Bittman says, eat less of certain foods. He doesn't say, don't ever eat that, right? Michael Pollan says, eat food, eat real food, right? Not heavily processed industrial food, mostly plants. And Marion Nessel from NYU says, you know, eat less, move more, and go easy on the junk foods. So the 3 things you can do are in this order. Smart consumption, right? So don't buy it if you don't need it, you know, have shopping lists, think really hard, not just about convenience, really think it through and think, how can I do this better? Then if you have leftovers, you can do composting, and beyond that, municipal or other regional recycling programs to take up the slack. Because remember, guys, if it's good for you, it's good for the planet. And the reverse is true. If it's good for the planet, it's good for people too. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Video on, but not mute. Thank you so much, Lori, for that. That's and thanks very much. Exactly to the time we talked about too, which is always appreciated. Normally in a real room, you get an applause and you would get some verbal sort of feedback. Instead, we're online in a webinar format. So what we're going to do now is just open up to a panel discussion to the extent we've got time for a few questions. But I just wanted to invite in with you Pippa Belader and Tony McDowell, who are just going to give a quick sort of almost like a Westport tinged update to what we're doing on the food waste piece, which I think covers many of your topics there. So I'm going to share a screen and meanwhile go to Pippa. So Pippa, over to you for a quick update from Westport.
Can you go to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So some of you have heard that we are starting the Sustainable Westport Zero Food Waste Challenge. A little different from what we originally anticipated, but we're going with what we have. Our goal is to decrease residential food waste by 25% or more. And next slide, please. I'm really optimistic. I think Sustainable Westport really believes that we can do this, and I am thrilled to say that we have the support of 14 partner organizations in town and their members. So there's a lot of movement towards this issue. So there are several things that we can do even though we are sheltering in place. And the first thing is really to get to know the food that we waste. So why is this important? Believe it or not, over 20% of Connecticut's residential garbage is food waste. So that is really something that we should be able to change. So for each individual family to decrease their food waste by 25%, I don't think that's as big a deal as it may sound, I hope. But we need to know what we're wasting, and it could be that you overcook a meal, or you stick some takeout leftovers in the back of the fridge and you forget about them, or you have an apple that goes bad. You just need to have a better sense of what you're wasting. And then once you figure that out, just work on how you plan your meals, how you prepare them, and then how you preserve your food. This is just a little photo of a sign that someone recommended, and I think it was mentioned as a little hint: eat me first. You put all the food that's about to go bad on one shelf and tell people, eat me. Then you are going to end up with some inedible products that's just inevitable, like banana peels or apple cores or coffee grounds, and all this stuff can be composted. So there are two ways you can do that right now in town. You can start a home composting setup if you don't already have one. And I actually am having a lot of fun with my barrel composter, which is in the picture there. I just put my food scraps in one side, rotate it whenever I go out to put my food scraps in there. When that one side is full, I go to the second side and do the same. By the time I filled the second side up, this dual composter, the first side is already compost, so I love it. There are lots of ways to do this, and we have a fair amount of information on sustainablewestport.org, so I recommend you go there. Now, if you're not up for it, you can do the food scraps recycling program, and there are 2 haulers in town who can do that for you, about $30 a month, and they will accept all foods, including animal-based foods. It's not a great idea to put animal-based products into your home composting, but it's fine if you're going to have your food scraps picked up by a hauler. We were going to open up this week a food scraps recycling drop-off center at the transfer station, but that's on hold for obvious reasons. And then the last thing I want to talk about briefly is the important aspect of food rescue. Now more than ever, we are aware of how many people are food insecure and how sad it is when we're not able to get food to people who really need it. So there are some suggestions on our website, and we'll be increasing them over time on ways to do food rescue. There's an app called Food Rescue US. And just this afternoon, I think we haven't figured out the details, but we're going to provide Westporters with a place to bring food that they are growing, and maybe they have too much of, say, you know, you have too many cucumbers or whatever you're growing. And those products will then be brought to a food pantry or somewhere where food insecure people can benefit from it. So very exciting. So I really do believe we have a great opportunity here during this pandemic to think about our food and eat as much of it as we can, and then whatever we don't, make it into compost or get it to other people. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Tony, any quick thoughts to add there?
Yeah, Peter, it reminds me of presentations we've had in the past and made mistakes about saying all the bad things and not a lot of the good things. Thank you, Pippa. That's a great program we're starting up here. The other thing, I always get caught of trying to think globally too much, and the big problems like feeding 7 to almost 9 billion people by the end of the century. But in fact, that's not our problem here in Westport, our community, our region. And I love the way Lori talked about the 3 R's, regional, regenerative, and resilient. If we could do something in our own backyard that's good, and we build upon that and others build upon that, then some of the bigger problems of scale start handling themselves. The other thing I noticed is the carbon footprint of regional is so much better. And she mentioned that at the top of the show. I thought that was great. There's a lot we can do to help our atmosphere by buying local. And I noticed Lori Cochran's on, she probably is. We have a great farmer's market here. And if we get Pippa's composting going, we start to have some pretty good throughput.
Great.
Excellent.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Tony and Pippa, for adding the local, the hyper local aspect on top of a almost local Lori. So and Lori, thanks again for the presentation. So we have got quite a few questions in already. Having said that, moderators fail. I didn't tell you to start how to get them in, but there are plenty for me to work on, even probably enough up to 6 o'clock. But having said that, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom. Everyone should have access to that, and quite a few people have. You can browse through the answered tab and see if your question's already been covered by, I've been trying to keep sort of up with that. And in the meantime, I'm going to kind of try and gather those in and pose some questions to the panel as we see as we come in. I think one of the big ones for us is that was coming through was this. I think you had a slide sort of animals are not the enemy, but then a little bit earlier there was this sort of almost like the pro meat sort of view, which is clearly your own, and then the Pollan quote, which I love, about the sort of the eat less, mostly plants. We've got sort of anything from sort of vegans in the audience through to sort of the McKinsey study about sort of like almost like the biggest emitter is sort of I think it's in between China and the US is what they call the Republic of Cow, and if cows were a country, like how much that was emitting. So it's not so much sort of either bashing meat, bashing vegetables, or whatever. It's just almost like your view on the balance of and the sort of the pro-environmental benefits of being vegetable, vegetarian, vegan, and what you thought on that, and what message for vegetarians that are in the audience do you have?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about this.
Yes, go for it.
Thank you for those questions, guys. First of all, I eat almost no meat. I love vegetables too much, right? I have to remind myself to eat more protein. So it's not that I'm pro animal. Again, I don't think it's two things, right? I don't think it's meat versus not meat or vegetables versus thing. I think it's way more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. All I meant is that I know a lot of farmers who dairy farmers in particular, because there's a lot there, and they're great people, and there's a role. Okay, so here's the thing. You just mentioned China. And you did mention global markets, right? Again, they grow so much, way more than you need, right? In order to have them on every shelf, in every gas station, in every restaurant, and every supermarket. All you do is know your own. I mean, I go to a couple of stores, multiply that in the millions. In order to have meat in every one of those locations on demand, when somebody walks in at any hour of the day and says, hey, I want a hamburger, that's excess. That's more than anyone would need. So if we reshape the marketplace, if we reshape our expectations to having more of truly on demand, right? This is a technological problem as much as anything else. Mm-hmm. If we know in advance what people want, if technology would work on that instead of, oh, I want something at any hour of the day and I want to press my phone and have it delivered to me, right? If we work truly on understanding what we need rather than what we may like at some point, we could reduce the amount of animal livestock, husbandry on a huge scale. So it's not, that's why I say it's not the animal per se. Yes, of course, cows are a huge problem, mm-hmm. but you have to ask, why do we have so many damn cows? Right? Yes.
So it's a bigger point. I think your answer is reassuring the audience that I was seeing there, just the fact that you are almost a vegetarian yourself. Like
oh my gosh,
the virtually no meat.
I love vegetable.
So you're an advocate of the pollen sort of quote.
Yeah, a real vegetable though, right? If I want collard greens, right, and so I'm going to cook it from scratch, and I'm going to eat it for three different meals. I'll get like a couple bunches and I knew I had to teach myself how to do that. Don't get me wrong. You don't like come fully equipped to do this. You have to decide that I want to eat this. And it's not like everything has to be a salad. I'm tired of the SpongeBob mentality here, right? It's not an ending.
So I'm going to do sort of some quick fire ones here. There's like lots of great ones here. Again, Lori, mainly for you, but I think there's some local stuff coming too. Mm-hmm. Maybe just on a local piece first, and then come back to you, Lori, as questions keep coming in. Food rescue, is it active right now, Pippa? What can people do? And I'm thinking there was a partnership, is it CHT and others that you've already got some stuff going on food rescue? But what can people do on that side? You got to come off mute.
Food Rescue US is active, and they are actually moving food from one location to another. Obviously, they don't have as many locations to move from. And we've written up something on Sustainable Westport, so go to the website. The ability to take your fresh grown fruits and vegetables and bring them somewhere is going to happen probably in June. So just keep going to sustainablewestport.org for updates.
Great, and I think there's a more than just the church, but the CHT Westport one has got some food pantries as well that are collecting some things as well. Is that right? There's a nod from Pippa too. So there's some things that are hyper local there as well, and I think that will be sort of both Sustainable Westport as a good hub for that. Back to you, Lori, on garbage disposals, good or bad, and maybe this is also a Pippa one as well. I'm looking at both of you like you're above each other right now. So who wants to go first?
Go for it, Pippa.
Yeah, I can tell you that the Director of Public Works would rather not have everybody put their food waste down the disposal. It's an extreme demand of the system over time. Excuse me. Great.
And Lori, to add, did you say? Or
no, I mean, didn't we all have that tour of the sewage system when we were in grade school? They show you exactly what it takes. It's not effortless. There's cost. Yep. There's always everything is cost.
Yeah, great. I want to pivot because Tony sort of brought it up to global, and you and Lori, your thesis is a powerful one in terms of you're making a case for sort of the current situation, bad for people, bad for the planet, case for resilience as well, and with industry, big industry getting a good, and many would say sort of fair bashing on this. The big business isn't going to go away, and in fact, say some of the people I deal with are sort of great, sort of almost like climate change facing students at Yale Center Business for Environment, and they want to save the world, and some of them want to work for big business to help them save the world. What is your message to big business that's listening? And I know that big business writ large is guilty of this, potentially the system you're mentioning, but there's definitely an angle of progressive business that sees what you see, and then students and others that want to work for them, and maybe even people on this call that already work for that progressive business. What's your message to the progressive business that's listening that is also big?
Define big.
Right? They're potentially in the guilty parties that you've defined, but they want to be part of a net zero future. What would you say to them to say, like, what do you want them to change? Because they're not going to get rid of themselves. So how do you want them to change?
Well, it's very interesting because in France right now, I follow the French trade on this too, and they were asking the question, is there actually a future for supermarkets? The French, they ask questions like that, right? So I really think that we're so used to seeing things the way they are, we have lost the ability to imagine how things can be. But I'm old enough to remember when it looked a little different than it does now. So my suggestion would be to really think outside the box. Don't just say that we're thinking outside the box. Mm-hmm. Really think about helping the situation, not just saying, oh, I'm doing this for the planet, but to really examine what that means, right? You can make a profit. I'm not a socialist, actually. I actually think that there is a role for markets. But I think because we've required that the profit be scalable at this level, right? Technology runs into this all the time. That there are small tech companies that have a perfectly good product, but because the investors cannot envision a way to make, Google scale money, that we have to stop thinking about that, especially in terms of something as important as food. Right? That everything maybe needs to look a little different than the way we've been used to that. And I don't necessarily think that's going to come from the top down on this one, though. I actually think, and I invite our young people, I invite our students right now to imagine how this system could look differently, especially now that we've seen what pandemic will do. 6 months ago, when I talked about this, people are like, oh, that's so apocalyptic. And now they're like, whoa, I need to get this food on my table for my kids and I can't get to the store. Suddenly it's urgent. Suddenly it's like, how does this work? And is there a better way to do this? So I would say, this is your moment. This is your moment to think differently.
And I think a lot of students and workers are stepping up, I think, in that way. Tony, anything to add as sort of arguably a big businessman becomes executive director of Earthplace, and can you lead you up? We've got 2 minutes left. If people are okay hanging on for an extra 2 minutes, I want to, Tony, lead into a close on like what you want people to do differently, and what you want them to sort of take away from the hour, and then I'll close at the end. So Tony, then Lori, then Pippa, then back to me. Go for it. You're on mute.
I'd go back to the demand side, Peter. I think we can't affect the supply chain and the originator of the products as much as we can affect the demand, and then they'll follow our choices. Now, one of the interesting things I saw that Bedford was doing, which I did for a few months and I should keep doing it, is Meatless Mondays. You mean, just build some habits that change, that help you, not only your health, but also the food chain. So I think those habits are good. And the other thing that's irksome to me is our waste stream. We can do an awful lot better of cleaning our recycling materials, getting it right, making it more productive and a better system that can actually not bankrupt towns and systems as well. Pippa's doing a good job with food waste, but we can do a better job with other recycling materials.
Great, thank you. Let's actually, we'll close with our features, Peter. So Pippa, 10, 20 seconds. What's your sort of, what do you want people to remember / do differently?
I think this is an opportunity. We are at home and with our families, and I think that people have really embraced the cooking and learning how to make the most out of the food that they have. It's not very convenient to go to supermarkets these days. So in a funny way, this is a great time to start thinking about our food and where it goes and what we can do with it. So I think we have a lot of opportunity here.
Yes, great. And Lori?
Just remember, this can be delicious, right? This is not like just your taskmaster. You can't do this. The best thing that happened, it was that I actually enjoy all my meals now. I don't waste anything. I look at my plate at the end of my meal and it's empty, which is really where you want to be, right? So make it delicious. That would be my.
That's great, and thank you so much. So again, this would be the time when in real life you would get the sort of human interaction and affirmative sort of claps. Unfortunately, it's a webinar. Maybe there'll be a button in Zoom soon where the attendees can press a little button and it would create a little clap sound. But thank you very much to Lori for our featured speaker and to our panelists and local experts Pippa and Tony here. Yeah, just to add and finish with a call to action for you all here. It's just like, hopefully it's been enjoyable and certainly informative for all. As we think about this intelligent recovery out of this situation here, we've changed our habits sort of almost like overnight by 100%, 50%, definitely tens of percent. And the science-based targets and all the experts that want to solve climate change are talking about a curve we have to bend on the 4%, 5% a year. So we've already changed a massive amount. Can we recover better as we come out of this? Is a real, I think, a challenge for us all. So consider yourselves, all the people on the list. I think great, no drop off at 6 o'clock. So thank you as a Zero Food Waste Challenge joiners. And all the aspects of that, from food rescue and the more thoughtful upfront pieces to the throughput of what you then do with it and how you compost afterwards. Talking of that, composting kits. Pippa is excited to be applying brand new branded Sustainable Westport stickers to home composting kits. We've got the first 50 available, and I think there's about 50 on the call, so there's potentially one each, but be careful, they will go quickly. A minimum $25 donation, and you can pick them up at Earthplace. And then if you put a bit more on that donation, they might even get delivered by a smiling Pippa or student that is helping Pippa. Income eligible, of course, free. We can work out a way to make sure you get your composting bin. And please email zerowaste@sustainablewestport.org for that. But more importantly, just go on the website, sustainablewestport.org. We're going to post this recording and any other follow-up resources there. So thank you to everybody. A big wave from our panelists and speakers to everybody. And hopefully we kept into all your questions, and we'll see you all soon at the next thing teamed up with the library. Thanks very much.
Thank you.